In Connecticut high society, silence is often mistaken for stupidity, and that was the most expensive mistake my sister-in-law, Candace, ever made. She threw a lavish party to honor her so-called prodigy son while mocking my daughter. However, she didn't know that inside my worn handbag sat an MIT letter ready to tear apart her perfect charade and redefine the word genius in front of 200 guests. My name is Alberta Kingsley. At 36 years old, I spent my days analyzing the complex circulatory systems of metropolitan infrastructures as a lead urban planning engineer for Apex Meridian Solutions. My job was to look at a chaotic intersection or a failing drainage grid and see the underlying logic, the invisible lines that could turn disorder into function. I dealt in concrete, steel, traffic flow, and demographic shifts. I was good at it because I understood that everything, no matter how broken it appeared on the surface, had a structure. But as I guided my 6-year-old mid-range sedan onto the exit ramp toward Greenwich, Connecticut, I was reminded that the one structure I had never been able to fix, the one foundation that was rotten to the core, was my own family. The asphalt of the highway gave way to the pristine, tree-lined avenues of one of the wealthiest zip codes in America. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of ancient oaks, dappling the windshield with flickering patterns of light and shadow. Beside me in the passenger seat sat my daughter, Brianna. She was 12 years old, though if you judged solely by the way she curled in on herself, pulling her knees up to her chest, she looked much younger. The air inside the car was heavy with a silence that I had learned not to interrupt. Brianna was clutching her tablet, a battered model that was 3 generations old. Its screen protected by a thick, rubberized case that had seen better days, like it was a life raft in the middle of a violent ocean. Her knuckles were white against the black casing. To anyone else, she looked terrified. To me, she looked focused. Brianna lived in a world that was often out of sync with the one everyone else inhabited. The clinical terms were auditory processing disorder and dyslexia. The doctors had explained it to me years ago with sympathetic nods and colorful pamphlets. They told me that her ears worked perfectly fine, but the bridge between her ears and her brain was like a faulty wire. Sounds came in, but they scrambled before they hit the processing center. When someone spoke to Brianna, she didn't hear a sentence. She heard a jumbled collection of phonemes that she had to manually rearrange into meaning. It was like living life on a permanent 3-second delay, constantly buffering while the rest of the world zoomed past at fiber optic speeds. Because of this, she hated crowds. She hated the cacophony of overlapping voices, and she particularly hated the place we were going. "You okay, Bree?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. I knew to wait. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Brianna blinked. She didn't look at me, her eyes fixed on the blurring scenery outside the window, but her grip on the tablet tightened just a fraction. "Loud," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine and the tires on the pavement. "It is going to be loud." "I know," I said. "We won't stay late, just enough to show face, congratulate your aunt, and then we are out. I promise." She nodded, a jerky, mechanical motion. Her lips began to move silently. If I leaned in close, I would have heard the faint, rhythmic muttering that had become her self-soothing mechanism. To the untrained eye specifically, to the eyes of my sister-in-law, Candace, and my brother. It looked like Brianna was talking to imaginary friends or simply losing her mind. They saw a girl spacing out, staring into the void, mouthing nonsense. But I knew better. I knew that she was reciting sequences. Sometimes it was the Fibonacci sequence. Other times it was prime numbers or complex algorithmic logic she had read about on forums that I could barely understand. Right now, judging by the cadence of her breathing and the sharp movements of her lips, she was running a mental simulation, organizing chaos into order, just like I did at work, but where I used blueprints. Brianna used raw data. It was her way of building a wall against anxiety, a fortress of logic where the unpredictable cruelty of social interaction could not reach her. We were heading to the lion's den. Ostensibly, Today was a celebration. Candace's boutique lifestyle brand company had just gone public on the stock exchange. The invitation had been printed on cardstock so thick it could double as a weapon, embossed with gold leaf, proclaiming a gala to celebrate innovation and success. But I knew the real agenda. In the Kingsley family, no event was ever just about the event. It was always a stage. And today, the spotlight was meant to shine exclusively on Preston, Candace's son, and my nephew. Preston was also 12. He was everything Brianna was not. At least on the surface, he was loud, confident, athletic, and possessed the kind of effortless charm that wealthy private schools manufactured on an assembly line. He was the golden boy, and Candace needed him to be the golden boy to validate her own existence. The closer we got to the estate, the tighter my chest felt. It wasn't just the dread of the social performance, it was the memory of the words. They hung in the air of my memory like toxic smoke. I remembered a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. Brianna had spilled a glass of cranberry juice because she had been startled by a sudden loud laugh from my brother. Candace had sighed, a sound of exaggerated exhaustion, and signaled for the maid. "It is all right, Alberta," she had said, her voice dripping with that poisonous sweetness she perfected. "We all know Brianna is a bit slow. We have to be patient with the dumb one, don't we?" The dumb one. That was the label they had slapped on my daughter. It wasn't just an insult. It was a verdict. My brother, passive and browbeaten, had never defended her. My mother-in-law, Margaret, had simply tutted and suggested that perhaps Brianna would be better suited for a vocational school where she would not have to think too hard. They saw her silence as emptiness. They saw her delay as stupidity. They saw her difficulty with reading aloud as a lack of intelligence. They had no idea that while they were gossiping about golf handicaps and stock portfolios, the 12-year-old girl sitting silently at the end of the table was calculating the structural load of the dining room table or memorizing the hex codes of the paint on the walls. I glanced at Brianna again. She had turned the tablet on, the screen glowing with lines of code that scrolled faster than most adults could read. She wasn't playing games. She was building. It was our secret, a universe she had constructed entirely on her own, and one that I had sworn to protect until she was ready to unveil it. But God, it was hard. It was physically painful to watch my brilliant, extraordinary child be treated like a mistake by people whose collective IQ probably didn't equal hers. "Mom," Brianna said suddenly. The delay was shorter this time. "Yeah, baby." "Preston is going to be mean," she stated. It wasn't a question. It was a data point, a probability approaching 100%. "If he is," I said, my grip on the steering wheel tightening until my knuckles matched hers, "then he is just showing everyone who he really is. It has nothing to do with you. You remember what we talked about, the signal and the noise?" Brianna nodded. "Preston is noisy. Candace is noise. The work is the signal." "Exactly," I whispered. "Focus on the signal." We turned off the main road and approached the gated entrance of the estate. The iron gates were open, flanked by security guards who looked more like Secret Service agents. As I drove through, the gravel crunching beneath the tires of my sedan, the house came into view. It was a monstrosity of modern colonial architecture, a sprawling mansion with white pillars, manicured hedges that looked like they had been cut with lasers, and a fountain in the circular driveway that probably cost more than my annual salary. The driveway was already packed. It looked like a showroom for a luxury car dealership. There were sleek black SUVs, convertibles with the tops down, and vintage sports cars that were driven only on Sundays. The chrome and polished paint glinted aggressively in the sun. I navigated my practical, gray sedan through the maze of wealth. I felt the eyes of the valet staff on us as I pulled up. My car had a dent on the rear bumper from a shopping cart incident 3 months ago, and the paint was fading slightly on the hood, beside a glistening silver coupe that looked like it had just rolled off a production line in Germany. My car looked like an intruder. It was a visual representation of the chasm between us. I was the widow who worked for a living, the single mother with the defective child. They were the Kingsleys of Greenwich, the royalty of Connecticut. The valet opened my door with a polite but strained smile, clearly unsure if he should treat me as a guest or a delivery driver. I stepped out, smoothing the fabric of my dress. It was a simple navy blue sheath, elegant but understated, bought off the rack at a department store. I knew Candace would be wearing something bespoke, something that screamed money. I walked around to the passenger side and opened the door for Brianna. She hesitated. She looked at the house, then at the line of cars, and then at me. Her eyes were wide, swimming with panic. The sensory input was already ramping up the smell of exhaust, the distant murmur of 200 people in the backyard, the clinking of glassware. "Come on," I said softly, extending my hand. "I am right here. You have your tablet." She tapped the device against her chest. "Good. If it gets too much, you find a corner and you dive in. Do not worry about being rude. You worry about you." She took my hand. Her palm was clammy. She stepped out of the car, her movements stiff. She was wearing a nice dress I had bought her, a soft yellow sundress that she had chosen because the fabric didn't itch. But she wore it awkwardly, hunching her shoulders as if trying to make herself smaller. As the valet drove my car away to hide it somewhere far behind the Bentleys and Maseratis, I stood there for a moment with my daughter, looking up at the imposing facade of the house. The windows were like giant, unblinking eyes staring down at us. Inside that house, they were waiting to judge her. They were waiting to pat her on the head and speak to her in that slow, condescending tone they reserved for toddlers and pets. They were waiting to call her the dumb one. I squeezed Brianna's hand. I felt a fierce, burning heat in my chest, a mixture of maternal rage and anticipation. They thought they knew who we were. They thought they understood the hierarchy. Candace thought she had won the game of life because she had the mansion, the IPO, and the loud, brash son. But she didn't know what was in my purse. She didn't know that the quiet, slow girl standing next to me had a mind that could eat her entire world for breakfast. "Ready?" I asked. Brianna took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second to calibrate, and then opened them. "Ready?" she said. We walked toward the front door, the silence between us heavy with the weight of the secret we carried. The contrast was stark, the opulence of the surroundings versus the quiet simplicity of our presence. But, as any engineer knew, the most important part of a structure wasn't the gilded facade, it was the steel in the foundation, and today, we were going to test exactly how much weight this house of cards could hold. The grand foyer of the Kingsley estate was designed to intimidate, and as the heavy oak doors swung open, the sound of polite society washed over us like a physical wave. The air smelled of expensive perfume, imported lilies, and the distinct, metallic scent of money. Crystal chandeliers, massive and dripping with light, hung from the vaulted ceiling, illuminating the 200 guests who had gathered to worship at the altar of Candace's success. And there she was. Candace stood at the base of the sweeping staircase, holding court. She was wearing a dress that likely cost more than my entire car, a shimmering, floor-length gown of silver silk that clung to her frame, designed to make her look like a statuette, something precious and untouchable. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless chignon, and her smile was a masterpiece of engineering. It was wide, dazzling, and completely devoid of warmth. As she greeted the board members and investors, tilting her head and laughing at the right intervals, I felt that familiar knot of nausea tighten in my stomach. It was the same sick feeling I had carried for 5 years, ever since the day my life split into 2 distinct halves before David died, and the nightmare that came after. The sight of her performative happiness triggered a memory so sharp it felt like a paper cut on my heart. The room around me seemed to blur, the chatter of the guests fading into a dull roar as my mind was pulled back to a rainy afternoon 5 years ago. I was sitting in the library of this very house. The room was dark, smelling of leather and old paper. Outside, the rain was hammering against the window panes, matching the storm that was raging inside my chest. David had been gone for only 3 weeks. The grief was a raw, open wound, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe, hard to stand, hard to exist. I was holding a 7-year-old Brianna on my lap, her small body trembling as she buried her face in my black mourning dress. My mother-in-law, Margaret, sat across from me, her face composed in a mask of tragic pity. Candace was there too, standing by the fireplace, swirling a glass of red wine. They had called a family meeting to discuss the future. I had been foolish enough to think they wanted to offer support. "Alberta, dear," Margaret had said, her voice soft but firm, the way one speaks to a stubborn child. "We have been talking, with David gone. Things are going to be difficult for you, financially, emotionally, and we have to be realistic about Brianna." I tightened my arms around my daughter. "What about Brianna?" Candace had stepped forward then, the firelight catching the gold rim of her glass. "We are worried about her development. Alberta, she is 7, and she can barely string a sentence together when she is spoken to. The staring, the lack of focus, it is not normal. We have spoken to some specialists. She has processing issues." I had defended, my voice cracking. "She is not deaf, and she is not incapable. She just needs time." "She needs a facility," Candace had said, the words landing like stones. "There is a boarding school in Vermont, a special institution for children with severe cognitive delays. They are trained to handle cases like hers. It would take the burden off you. You could focus on your career. Maybe even date again eventually. It is for her own good. She is never going to be able to learn normally, and keeping her in a regular school is just cruel." I remembered the cold horror that had washed over me. They were not offering help. They were suggesting I discard my child like a broken toy. They saw her silence and assumed there was nothing behind it. They looked at her difficulties and decided she was a defect in the pristine Kingsley lineage. "I will never send her away," I had hissed, standing up with Brianna in my arms, my legs shaking, but my resolve turning to steel. "She is my daughter. She is brilliant in ways you cannot even begin to understand." Candace had just sipped her wine, her eyes cold. "Denial is a stage of grief, Alberta, but do not say we did not try to save you from a lifetime of caretaking." The memory faded, dissolving back into the glittering reality of the party, but the phantom pain of that conversation remained. 5 years later, they still looked at us the same way. We were the charity cases, the embarrassing relationship. I guided Brianna through the crowd, keeping a protective hand on her shoulder. The guests parted for us, not out of respect, but out of a desire to avoid contamination. These were Candace's people tech investors, hedge fund managers, social climbers. They held flutes of champagne and scanned the room for someone more important to talk to. When their eyes landed on us, there was a flicker of recognition, followed by a swift dismissal. They knew the narrative Candace had spun. Poor Alberta. Poor, struggling Alberta with the slow child. "Just keep moving," I whispered to Brianna. "Find a quiet spot." Brianna was gripping her tablet so hard her knuckles were white. Her eyes were darting around, tracking the movement of the waiters, the flickering of the candles, the sway of the curtains. To her, this room was an assault. The clinking of glasses sounded like gunshots. The overlapping conversations were a chaotic data stream she could not filter out. "Comparing numbers," she mumbled, her voice barely a breath. "Traffic density, high volume." "That is right," I soothed. "Just manage the flow." Suddenly, the energy in the room shifted. It was a subtle change, like the tide turning. Heads turned toward the patio doors. The murmurs of conversation stopped, replaced by coos of admiration and enthusiastic greetings. Preston had arrived. My nephew strode into the room with the confidence of a CEO. Despite being only 12 years old, he was wearing a custom-tailored navy blazer with the crest of his prep school embroidered in gold on the pocket. His hair was perfectly styled, and he had that easy practicing smile that rich men used to disarm their opponents. He was flanked by 2 other boys, his lieutenants, who laughed too loudly at whatever he had just said. "There he is, the man of the hour," someone shouted. Candace beamed, her face lighting up with genuine pride, the only genuine emotion she seemed capable of. She rushed over, placing a hand on Preston's shoulder, presenting him to the room like a prize racehorse. "Everyone, you all know my Preston. We have had such exciting news this week about his acceptance into the prep program." The room erupted in applause. Preston soaked it up, waving casually. He reveled in it. This was the narrative Candace had constructed Preston. The prodigy, Preston, the athlete, Preston, the future leader. It didn't matter that his math grades were bought with donations to the school, or that his essays were written by a team of high-priced tutors. The facade was flawless. Comparing him to Brianna was Candace's favorite pastime. Over the years, every family gathering has been a scorecard. Preston made the lacrosse team. Brianna is still in remedial reading. Preston won the debate championship. Brianna cried because the fireworks were too loud. Candace used Preston as a bludgeon to beat down my daughter's self-worth. Preston began to work the room, shaking hands with adults, charming the elderly women. He was moving toward the buffet table, his path taking him directly past where Brianna and I were standing near a decorative pillar. I saw it happen in slow motion. Preston saw us. His eyes locked onto Brianna, a smirk, sharp and cruel, twisted the corner of his mouth. He didn't slow down. He didn't change course. He walked straight at her. Brianna was looking down at her tablet, trying to anchor herself in her code. She didn't see him coming. Oops. Preston lowered his shoulder and slammed into Brianna. It wasn't a brush. It was a check, forceful and deliberate. Brianna gasped, losing her balance. She stumbled sideways, her hip colliding hard with the marble pillar. The tablet slipped from her hands, clattering onto the floor. Thankfully, the heavy-duty case protected it, but the noise drew eyes. Preston stopped, feigning surprise. He looked down at Brianna, who was shrinking against the pillar, clutching her arm where he had struck her. "Sorry," Preston said, his voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. He chuckled, a sound that lacked any trace of apology. "I didn't see you there. Brianna, you are just so faint. You know you are practically invisible." His friends snickered. A few adults nearby chuckled uncomfortably, interpreting it as roughhousing between cousins rather than what it was bullying. My blood turned to lava. The heat rose up my neck, burning my cheeks. I took a step forward, my hands curling into fists. I wanted to grab him by that expensive lapel. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he wasn't fit to polish my daughter's shoes. I wanted to shatter the composure of this entire room. But I felt a small hand on my wrist. I looked down. Brianna was looking at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear, but she was shaking her head slightly. She picked up her tablet, hugging it to her chest. "Project Alpha," she whispered. The code words, our secret. It was a reminder. Do not engage. Do not fight on their territory. Wait for the launch. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of hypocrisy and expensive cologne. I forced my fingers to uncurl. "You are right," I whispered back, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Project Alpha, stick to the mission." Preston, seeing he wouldn't get a reaction, rolled his eyes and moved on, basking in the adoration of a group of investors who were congratulating him on his bright future. I put my arm around Brianna, steering her away from the center of the room, toward a quieter alcove near the library. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The injustice of it was suffocating. They treated him like a god for achievements he hadn't earned, and they treated her like a ghost for a brilliance they couldn't see. We found a small respite near a display of antique vases. I knelt down to check Brianna's arm. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, though she was rubbing the spot. "He is illogical. Aggression yields no data." "He is a bully, honey, and bullies are usually the weakest people in the room." Before I could comfort her further, a shadow fell over us. I looked up to see an elderly woman draped in heavy velvet and pearls standing there. It was Mrs. Eleanor, a distant cousin of my late husband. She was holding a martini glass with a shaky hand. "Alberta," she croaked, her voice raspy. "I haven't seen you in ages." I stood up, forcing a polite smile. "Hello, Eleanor. Good to see you." Eleanor turned her gaze to Brianna. She squinted, peering at my daughter through thick spectacles. "And this is the little one, Brianna. Isn't it?" Brianna froze. Direct address, eye contact. The auditory processing delay kicked in. I saw the gears turning in Brianna's mind. She heard the sound. She was deconstructing the phonemes. She was searching for the meaning. And then she had to formulate a response and send it to her mouth. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. To Eleanor. The silence was just a void. She didn't see the intense computation happening behind Brianna's eyes. She just saw a blank stare. "Hello," Brianna finally said, the word coming out a little too loud, a little too flat. Eleanor recoiled slightly, then let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. She looked at me, shaking her head, her expression dripping with that toxic pity. "Such a shame," Eleanor murmured, loud enough for Brianna to hear perfectly. "She really is a pretty thing. It is a tragedy that her mind is, well, broken. You must have the patience of a saint. Alberta." She patted my arm as if consoling me for a terminal illness, then turned and waddled away toward the bar. I stood there, frozen. The insult hung in the air. Gross and heavy. Broken. They called her broken because she didn't operate on their frequency. They dismissed her because she required 3 seconds of patience that they were too selfish to give. I looked at Brianna. She had lowered her head, her hair falling forward to hide her face. She was tapping the screen of her tablet again. Faster this time. "I am not broken," she whispered to the screen. "No," I said fiercely, grabbing her shoulders and making her look at me. "You are not. You are the most advanced system in this entire house. They are running on dial-up, and you are a supercomputer. Do you understand me?" She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. I wiped it away with my thumb. The rage inside me had solidified. It was no longer a hot, chaotic fire. It was a cold, hard block of ice. I looked out at the party, at Candace laughing with her head thrown back, at Preston smugly eating a shrimp puff, at Eleanor gossiping in the corner. They thought we were defeated. They thought we were the background noise to their symphony. "Let them talk," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Let them laugh for 1 more hour, because when we are done, they are never going to forget the name Brianna Kingsley." I checked my watch. The time was ticking down. The presentation was scheduled to start soon. The guests were beginning to drift toward the main hall where the projector screen had been set up. Candace was going to give her speech. She was going to glorify her son and humiliate mine one last time. But she didn't know that the broken girl in the corner had already found the vulnerability in the system. She didn't know that the dumb one was holding the detonator. I took Brianna's hand. "Come on, let's go watch the show." We walked out of the alcove, stepping back into the fray. The invisible scars they had inflicted on us over the years, the insults, the exclusions. The whispers were throbbing, but pain, I had learned, could be fuel, and tonight we had a full tank. While the champagne flowed and the hollow laughter of Greenwich society echoed off the vaulted ceilings, my mind drifted away from the suffocating opulence of the Kingsley estate. I retreated to a different world, a world that existed in the quiet, dusty sanctuary of our detached garage 20 miles away. That was where the truth lived. That was where the silence of my daughter, Brianna, was not a deficit, but a canvas. To understand what was about to happen, one had to understand the nights we spent awake while the rest of the world slept. The doctors called it a disorder. They said Brianna's brain struggled to process the spoken word, what they failed to realize, and what I had only discovered by watching her in the soft glow of computer monitors, was that her brain had simply traded one language for another. She did not think in English. She did not think in sentences subject to the messy nuances of tone and inflection. Brianna thought in pure logic. She thought in nodes, vectors, and syntax. To her, the world was a massive, flowing data set. When she looked at a traffic jam, she didn't see cars. She saw a variable flow rate problem caused by inefficient signal timing. When she looked at a flock of birds, she saw a distributed network algorithm. Our garage looked nothing like the pristine, marble-floored playrooms Preston had grown up in. It looked like the inside of a scavenged spacecraft. For the past 3 years, Brianna and I had gone dumpster diving behind university tech centers and corporate offices. We collected what the world called trash: fried motherboards, discarded server racks, cracked tablets, and tangles of copper wire. To Candace, these things were garbage, unfit for a Kingsley. To Brianna, they were raw materials. With a soldering iron in her small hand and a magnifying glass strapped to her head, Brianna had resurrected these dead machines. She had built a supercomputer cluster cooling system using parts from an old refrigerator and radiator fans. It hummed with a low, steady vibration that seemed to calm her. It was on this Frankenstein monster of a machine that she had built Project Alpha. It wasn't a game. It wasn't a school project. It was a fully autonomous artificial intelligence designed to optimize urban traffic grids in real time. Brianna had written the code from scratch, using a hybrid of Python and C++ that she had taught herself by reading manuals I borrowed from the engineering library at my firm. The system used camera feeds to predict traffic surges before they happened, adjusting light cycles to reduce idle time and, consequently, carbon emissions. I had run the simulations myself. The efficiency increase was not 5% or 10%, it was 40%. It was revolutionary, and it had been created by a 12-year-old girl who couldn't order a pizza over the phone without panicking. 6 months ago, I had made a decision that terrified me. I sat at my kitchen table late one night, staring at the glowing portal of the Global Future Shapers Innovation Challenge. It was a competition sponsored by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, open to visionaries under 18. The application asked for a thesis, a code repository, and a proof of concept. I looked at Brianna, asleep on the couch with a keyboard on her lap, and I hit the submit button. I didn't tell her. I couldn't risk the crushing weight of disappointment if the world rejected her the way her family had. The contrast between Brianna's reality and Preston's reality was so sharp it could cut glass. While Brianna was optimizing neural networks in a freezing garage, Preston was being manufactured. I knew the truth about his academic success because Candace was not as discreet as she thought she was. I knew about the tutors who were paid $300 an hour to essentially do his homework for him. I knew about the consultants hired to polish his essays until they shone with a brilliance that was not his own. Preston was a product. He was an empty vessel filled with money and packaged as a prodigy. He didn't know how to learn. He only knew how to recite. If you took away the script, he was blank. But Brianna was the author. Back in the present, the air in the ballroom felt stale. I watched Brianna sitting on the velvet ottoman in the corner. To the casual observer and to everyone in this room, she looked like a bored child playing a game on a tablet to pass the time. Candace had even sneered earlier that Brianna was probably playing Candy Crush while the adults talked business. But I knew that posture. I knew the way her eyes darted across the screen, left to right, top to bottom, scanning streams of data. She wasn't playing, she was hunting. The Kingsley estate was a smart home. Candace had bragged about it endlessly in the local papers. Everything was automated: the lights, the locks, the climate control, the security cameras. It was controlled by a central server that Candace claimed was impenetrable. A fortress of modern security installed by a boutique firm that charged $50,000 for the privilege. Brianna shifted slightly. Her fingers flew across the virtual keyboard of her battered tablet. She wasn't just connecting to the Wi-Fi, she was dissecting the network architecture. I moved closer to her, pretending to adjust the strap of my sandal. "Status," I whispered, barely moving my lips. Brianna didn't look up. Her voice was a monotone whisper, barely audible over the clinking of silverware. "The firewall has a redundancy error. The encryption key handshake is lagging by 400 milliseconds. It is sloppy." "Sloppy." "They use default admin passwords for the subnet," she murmured. "User admin, password admin 123. I almost laughed. $50,000 for a security system, and they hadn't changed the factory settings on the subrouters. It was the perfect metaphor for this entire family, expensive on the outside, hollow and incompetent on the inside. "Are you in?" I asked. Brianna tapped the screen one last time, a heavy, final tap. I have root access. I see everything. The cameras, the logs, the email archives. Then, it happened. The moment that sent a shiver down my spine. Brianna looked up from the screen. She looked across the room at Candace, who was currently laughing loudly at a joke made by a bank executive. And for the first time that evening, for the first time in months, Brianna smiled. It wasn't the shy, apologetic smile she usually offered to the world to beg for forgiveness for her existence. It was a cold, sharp, terrifyingly intelligent smile. It was the smile of someone who held the master key to the universe. In that split second, the power dynamic in the room shifted violently. Though only the two of us felt the tremor, Candace was the queen of the party, but Brianna was the god of the machine. Suddenly, my phone buzzed against my thigh. It was a long, sustained vibration, demanding attention. I pulled it out, shielding the screen with my hand. The notification was from a number I didn't have saved, but the area code was 617. Massachusetts, Cambridge. I swiped it open. The text message was brief, professional, and earth-shattering. From Dr. Eris Thorne, MIT. Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. Subject urgent. Project Alpha evaluation. Ms. Kingsley. We have completed the final review of the code repository submitted for Brianna. The review board is in a state of disbelief. We need to initiate a secure video conference immediately. This cannot wait until Monday. Please confirm availability. My breath hitched in my throat. Dr. Eris Thorne. I knew that name. He was a legend in the field of algorithmic theory. He didn't send texts to random applicants. He didn't ask for urgent meetings on a Saturday evening unless something monumental had occurred. I looked at Brianna. She was watching me, her eyes clear and focused. She knew. Somehow, she knew that the signal she had sent out into the world had finally found a receiver that was tuned to her frequency. The letter in my purse, the physical letter that had arrived yesterday, was just the opening act. This text message was the confirmation. We weren't just attending a party. We were standing on the precipice of a revolution. Mom, Brianna whispered. The projector. I looked up. Candace was tapping a spoon against her champagne flute, calling for silence. The lights in the room were beginning to dim as the motorized screen lowered from the ceiling. Ladies and gentlemen, Candace announced, her voice amplified by the microphone. If I could have your attention, we have a very special presentation prepared to honor the future of the Kingsley legacy. She gestured grandly toward Preston, who was standing by the podium, looking smug. He doesn't know, Brianna said softly. He doesn't know I have the logs. No, I replied, slipping my phone back into my pocket. My hand brushed against the cool metal of the device, feeling like the hilt of a sword. He doesn't, but he is about to learn. The room fell silent, waiting for the propaganda to begin. I looked at the massive 100-inch screen. It was connected to the house network, the same network that my 12-year-old daughter now owned. The pieces were all in place. The dumb one was piloting the ship, and the genius was about to walk the plank. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. The years of silence, the years of swallowing their insults, the years of watching my daughter think she was broken, it all ended tonight. Wait for the signal, I whispered to Brianna. She nodded, her finger hovering over the enter key on her tablet. Waiting. The trap was set, and Candace, in all her arrogance, was about to walk right into it. The sharp, crystalline chime of a silver spoon tapping against a champagne flute sliced through the ambient murmur of the room. It was a sound I had come to associate with performative humility, the kind that always preceded a moment of supreme arrogance. The chatter died down instantly, conditioned by years of social training to obey the summons of the hostess. Candace stood on the raised platform at the far end of the ballroom. A single spotlight, rigged specifically for this moment, cut through the dimmed ambiance and illuminated her in a halo of white light. She basked in it. She looked less like a mother and more like a corporate mascot for genetic perfection. Beside her, projected onto the massive screen that had descended from the ceiling. Was the Kingsley family crest a lion rampant, holding a sword rendered in high-definition gold? "If I could have everyone's attention, please," Candace purred into the microphone. Her voice was amplified by the surround sound speakers hidden in the crown molding, washing over the guests with a velvety smoothness that masked the jagged edges of her ego. "My husband and I are so touched that you could all join us this evening. Tonight is about celebration. It is about looking forward." I stood near the back, my hand resting lightly on Brianna's shoulder. I could feel the tension in her small frame. She wasn't looking at Candace. She was looking at her tablet, her thumb hovering over a specific line of code. The screen was dimmed to the lowest setting, invisible to everyone but us, to the room. We were statues, the widow and the mute decorating the periphery of the main event. Candace gestured to the screen, and the image changed. It was now a slideshow of Preston in a suit, Preston holding a tennis racket, Preston shaking hands with a senator. The photos were heavily edited, the lighting adjusted to make him look angelic and commanding. "We Kingsleys have always believed in a standard," Candace continued, pacing the stage with the practiced rhythm of a TED Talk speaker. "Excellence is not an accident. It is a trait. It is bred, cultivated, and refined. When I married into this family, I made a vow to uphold that legacy, to ensure that the next generation was not just adequate, but exceptional." She paused for effect. The crowd nodded in unison. It was a room full of people who believed that net worth was directly correlated to moral worth. "And tonight," Candace said, her voice rising in a crescendo, "I am overwhelmingly proud to announce that the legacy is secure. We received the news this morning. My son, Preston, has been accepted into the freshman class at Exeter." A collective gasp went through the room, followed by thunderous applause. Exeter. It was the golden ticket. It was the stamp of approval that every parent in this zip code would kill for. Candace held up a hand to quiet the adulation, though she was clearly drinking it in. "But that is not all. In recognition of this monumental achievement, and in accordance with the family bylaws, my father-in-law's estate has officially released the educational trust fund reserved for the primary heir. As of today, Preston is the sole beneficiary of $500,000 to support his academic journey." $500,000. The number hung in the air like a dense fog. I felt my stomach clench. That money had been set aside by Brianna's grandfather years ago, intended to be split among the grandchildren. But after David died, the terms had been rewritten. The primary heir clause had been added, and since Brianna had been deemed competitively unfit by the family lawyers at Candace's urging, she had been cut out. "He deserves every penny," someone shouted from the front row. "Thank you," Candace beamed. She beckoned Preston to join her on stage. He walked up the steps, chin held high, wearing a smirk that suggested he thought he had earned this money by birthright rather than by having his mother bully the estate executor. Then, my mother-in-law, Margaret, stepped into the light. She was draped in emeralds that likely cost more than the house I grew up in. She took the microphone from Candace, her hands shaking slightly, not from age, but from the thrill of the moment. "I look at this boy," Margaret said, her voice wavering with theatrical emotion as she placed a hand on Preston's cheek, "and I see the only future this family has. He is strong, he is sharp, he is a Kingsley through and through. In a world that is becoming increasingly mediocre, Preston is a beacon of what superior stock looks like." Superior stock. She talked about us like we were cattle. I looked down at Brianna. She hadn't flinched. She was listening, processing the words, but they didn't seem to hurt her anymore. She was vibrating with a different kind of energy now. It was the energy of a predator waiting for the prey to step into the trap. Margaret handed the microphone back to Candace. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I knew Candace's script. It wasn't enough for her to win. She had to make sure everyone else knew they had lost. Candace scanned the room. Her eyes, cold and predatory, locked onto us. The spotlight didn't move, but the attention of the room followed her gaze. 200 heads turned. 400 eyes fixed on the woman in the gray dress and the girl with the noise-canceling headphones around her neck. "And of course," Candace said, her tone shifting. It dropped an octave, becoming syrupy and patronizing. "We must not forget the other members of our family. We believe in inclusivity here." She walked to the edge of the stage, pointing directly at Brianna. "We should also take a moment to give a round of applause for little Brianna," Candace announced. "I know she is sitting back there in the dark. She might not understand exactly what we are saying right now, or the magnitude of what Preston has achieved, but we want her to feel included. Don't we?" The silence that followed was excruciating. Then, a few people started to clap. It wasn't the thunderous applause Preston had received. It was a slow, pitying golf clap, the kind of applause you give to a toddler who just managed not to fall over. "It is okay, Brianna," Candace called out, pitching her voice loud and slow, as if speaking to someone who didn't speak the language. "We are clapping for you. Good job coming out tonight." Preston, standing center stage, let out a laugh. It was sharp and cruel. He leaned into the microphone stand, just enough for his voice to carry. "She probably thinks we are clapping because she didn't spill her juice this time." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. It started with Preston's friends, then spread to the parents. A wave of socially sanctioned cruelty. They were laughing at a 12-year-old girl. They were laughing at my daughter. I felt the heat rising in my chest, a physical burning sensation that threatened to consume me. My fingernails dug into my palms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm the stage and tear the microphone from her hand, but I felt Brianna's hand touch mine. Her fingers were cool and steady. She tapped my hand twice. "Hold." Candace wasn't finished. She held up a hand to quiet the laughter, pretending to be benevolent. Now, she chided playfully. "Let us be kind. Alberta, darling, I want you to know that we haven't forgotten about Brianna's future either. Preston and I were discussing it this morning." She looked at her son with adoration, then back at me with a sneer disguised as a smile. "Since Preston has received the full educational trust, we have decided to set up a small, separate charitable fund. We are calling it the Kingsley Care Initiative." She paused, waiting for the murmurs of admiration to settle. "We are going to put aside $5,000 to help Brianna learn a trade when she turns 18, Candace declared magnanimously. "We have been looking into vocational programs, simple things, floral arrangement, or perhaps stocking shelves. We think manual labor would be a perfect fit for her. Limited capabilities. It is honest work, and it will keep her occupied." The room cooed. Oh, how generous, how noble of Candace to look after the defective cousin. "It is important to be realistic," Candace continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she turned to her friends standing at the edge of the stage. She thought she was off mic. She thought the main address was over. But she was standing right next to the floral arrangement that concealed one of the directional speakers, and the sound technician, likely bored or inattentive, hadn't cut the feed yet. Candace leaned in toward a woman in a red dress. "Honestly, it is the best we can do. The girl is a lost cause. I just hope she doesn't drool on the furniture tonight. It is embarrassing enough having the dumb one in the family photos without her making a scene." The dumb one. The words boomed through the ballroom. The directional speaker picked up the whisper and threw it against the back wall with perfect clarity. It echoed off the marble floors. It bounced off the crystal chandeliers. The dumb one? The room froze. The polite smiles faltered. Even these people, with their hearts made of stone and bank accounts, knew that a line had been crossed. It was one thing to think about it. It was another to broadcast it to 200 guests. Candace's eyes went wide. She heard her own voice echo back to her a second later. She realized her mistake. She reached for her throat, her face flushing a deep, ugly crimson. Preston stopped smirking. He looked at his mother, then at the crowd. Sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the air in the room grew heavy, charged with a sudden, electric tension. I looked at Brianna. She wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She had lifted her head. She was looking directly at the stage. Her expression was unreadable, ancient and terrifyingly calm. I squeezed her shoulder. "Now," I whispered. Brianna looked at me. Her eyes were clear. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. The little girl who hid in the garage was gone. "Now," she said. I took a step forward, emerging from the shadows of the back corner. The sound of my heels clicking on the parquet floor was the only sound in the room. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate cadence of an executioner. Candace watched me approach. She tried to recover, forcing a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Oh, Alberta, don't look so serious. You have said enough, Candace," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the room, I didn't need a microphone. "You have spent 5 years talking. You have spent 5 years defining my daughter by what she cannot do. You have called her slow. You have called her broken. And tonight, you called her the dumb one." I reached the center of the aisle. I was 30 feet from the stage, but I felt like I was towering over her. "But the funny thing about silence, Candace," I continued, continuing my advance, "is that you assume it is empty. You assume that because she doesn't speak your language, she has nothing to say." "Alberta, sit down," Margaret hissed from the side of the stage. "You are making a scene." "I am not making a scene, Margaret," I said, locking eyes with the old woman. "I am making a correction." I stopped. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Brianna, sitting 20 feet behind me, tapped her tablet screen once. "You wanted to talk about the future," I said to Candace. "You wanted to show us what a genius looks like. You wanted to show us the Kingsley legacy." "Security!" Candace shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "Get her out of here. She is hysterical." 2 burly guards in black suits stepped forward from the shadows, moving toward me. "I wouldn't do that," I said calmly, holding up my phone. "Unless you want to explain to the federal authorities why you are removing a legal guardian from the premises while a crime is being exposed." The guards hesitated. The word federal had a way of freezing people in their tracks. "What are you talking about?" Preston shouted, his voice cracking. "You are crazy." "Am I?" I looked at the boy. "Preston, do you know what a firewall is?" He blinked, confused. "What?" "I didn't think so," I said. "But Brianna does." I swiped up on my phone screen. Behind Candace, the massive projection screen flickered. The golden lion crest dissolved. The photo of Preston in his tennis whites vanished. In its place, a black screen appeared. Then, a single, spinning logo faded into view. It was a stylized set of bars forming a crimson and gray geometric shape. It was the seal of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And below it, in stark, white, typewriter font, a single word pulsed like a heartbeat. "Confidential." The room gasped. "You called her the dumb one," I said, my voice cutting through the shock like a razor. "Let me introduce you to the person you have really been mocking." The echo of Candace's whisper, "the dumb one," did not just hang in the air. It seemed to physically strike my daughter, beside me. Brianna crumbled. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a small, internal implosion that was infinitely more painful to watch. Her head dropped, her chin tucking into her chest as if she were trying to disappear inside her own collarbones. I saw the tremor start in her hands, the way her fingers curled inward, white-knuckled, abandoning the tablet that had been her shield all evening. A single tear, heavy and shining in the dim light, rolled off the tip of her nose and splashed onto the dark screen of her device. It was followed by another, and then another. She didn't make a sound. She didn't sob. She just leaked pain in total silence. "Mom," she mouthed, the word barely a breath. "Go, please, go." She wanted to run. She wanted to retreat to the safety of our garage, to the comforting hum of her servers, to a world where logic dictated the rules and cruelty was just a variable she could delete. For 5 years, that had been our pattern. We took the hits, we swallowed the insults, and we retreated. We let them win because we thought survival was the only victory available to us. But as I looked at that tear streaking across the glass screen, a screen that held the undeniable proof of her genius, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a break. It was a realignment. The fear that had governed my life since David died evaporated, replaced by a cold, lucid clarity. I reached down and took Brianna's hand. Her palm was sweating, cold and clammy. She pulled slightly, leaning toward the exit, toward the darkness of the garden. "No," I said. My voice was low, but it vibrated with a frequency I had never heard from myself before. I didn't pull her toward the door. I pulled her forward. Brianna stumbled, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. She resisted, planting her feet, but I was possessed by a mother's fury, a force of nature that no amount of social anxiety could withstand. I locked eyes with her. "We are not leaving," I told her, loud enough for the people at the nearby tables to hear. "Head up, Brianna, head up." I turned my back on the exit and began to walk, not away from the pain, but directly into the center of it. I walked toward the stage. The sound of my heels striking the hardwood floor was rhythmic and aggressive, a military cadence in a room full of soft shuffles. The crowd parted. They didn't move out of respect. They moved out of confusion. They had seen the beaten-down widow for so long that they didn't recognize the woman marching down the center aisle with her daughter in tow. Candace was still on stage, freezing in the aftermath of her hot mic slip. She saw me coming. Her eyes darted to the side, looking for an escape route, but she was trapped by the spotlight she had demanded. She forced a smile that looked like a rictus of panic. "Alberta," she called out, her voice shrill and amplified. "Alberta, honey, what are you doing? Let us not make this about you. We are in the middle of a toast." I didn't stop. I walked past the first row of VIPs. I walked past the table where Preston sat, looking bewildered and slightly afraid. I walked up the 3 stairs to the stage. The height difference changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't the poor relation looking up. I was standing on their level. The lights were blinding, hot against my skin, but I didn't blink. "Alberta, get down," Candace hissed, stepping away from the microphone so only I could hear. "You are ruining Preston's moment. You are embarrassing yourself. Look at Brianna. She is shaking. Get her out of here." I looked at Brianna. She was shaking, but she wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at me, and in my eyes, she saw the reflection of her own worth. I reached out and grabbed the microphone stand. Candace tried to block me, placing her hand over mine. Her grip was weak, slippery with sweat. I ripped the microphone from the stand with a sharp metallic screech that sent a feedback loop whining through the speakers. The audience winced, hands flying to cover their ears. Good. I wanted them to feel uncomfortable. "You are right, Candace," I said into the mic. My voice boomed, filling every corner of the room, drowning out the whispers, the clinking glasses, the judgment. "We absolutely need to talk about ability. We need to talk about what it means to be a Kingsley." From the side of the stage, my mother-in-law, Margaret, surged forward. Her face was a mask of purple rage. She looked like a gargoyle that had been animated by pure malice. "Sit down," Margaret barked, her voice cracking. "Sit down immediately. Have you lost your mind? Do not make us call the police. You are making a fool of this family." I turned to the old woman. For years, her disapproval had been the weight dragging me down. Now, she looked small. She looked like a relic of a bygone era. Clinging to power she no longer possessed. "I am not the one making a fool of this family." "Margaret," I said, my voice icy and calm, "you have done a fine job of that yourselves." I turned back to the crowd. 200 faces stared back at me. I saw the pity turning to shock. I was curious. "For 5 years," I said, pointing a finger at my daughter, who stood beside me, clutching her tablet like a holy book. "For 5 years. You have looked at this girl and seen nothing. You called her slow. You called her broken." I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with Candace. "And tonight," I continued, "you called her the dumb one." Candace flinched as if I had slapped her. "Well," I said, "I think it is time we fixed your vocabulary. I want to redefine that word for you. I want to show you exactly what you have been mocking." Candace's eyes went wide with realization. She looked at the phone in my hand, then at the massive screen behind us. Panic, primal and desperate, seized her. "Security!" she screamed, abandoning all pretense of poise. "Cut the mic. Get them off the stage. Now!" Two large men in dark suits started up the stairs, moving fast. "Do it, Brianna," I commanded. Brianna didn't hesitate. She tapped her tablet. I held up my phone. I didn't need a cable. Brianna had already bridged the connection. She had hijacked the casting protocol of the house's media server. My phone wasn't just a phone anymore. It was the broadcasting station for the entire estate. The image of the Kingsley crest, the lion and the sword, flickered violently on the 100-inch screen behind us. It distorted, tearing apart in a shower of digital pixels, as if the system itself was rejecting the lie it had been forced to display. The screen went black. A heavy, suffocating darkness filled the room. The security guards hesitated on the steps, confused by the sudden blackout. Then, a single image cut through the dark. It wasn't a picture of a boy in a tennis outfit. It wasn't a family crest. It was a logo, a geometric, maroon and gray set of blocks forming the letters that every engineer, every scientist, and every academic in the world recognized instantly. MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And beneath it, stamped in a bold red font that commanded absolute silence, confidential. The room didn't just go quiet. It went dead. The air was sucked out of the space. The guests, many of whom were alumni of Ivy League schools, many of whom worked in tech and finance, leaned forward. They knew what that logo meant. They knew you didn't just download that header from the internet. Candace froze, her hand halfway raised to signal the guards again. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. I looked at the screen, then back at the crowd. "You wanted to talk about the future," I asked, my voice ringing out with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Let me show you the future." I tapped the screen of my phone. The slide changed. The document that appeared was dense. It was headed with the official seal of the MIT Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. The subject line was visible even from the back of the room. Official grant of patent review and fellowship offer. Recipient: Brianna Kingsley, age 12. Project AlphaNet. Autonomous Urban Flow Optimization. The murmurs began. A low rumble that started in the front row and rolled backward like a tsunami. I saw a man in the second row, the CEO of a major logistics firm, stand up. He squinted at the screen, then reached into his pocket for his glasses. He put them on, read the text, and his jaw literally dropped. "That is impossible," Candace whispered, her voice trembling. That is fake. You made that up." "Did I asked. I swiped again. The screen shifted to a video feed. It wasn't a pre-recorded video. It was a live stream. The timestamp in the corner matched the current time. The location tag read, Cambridge, Massachusetts. A face appeared on the giant screen. It was an older man with wild gray hair and thick glasses, sitting in an office cluttered with whiteboards covered in equations. It was Dr. Aris Thorne. The room gasped. Dr. Thorne was a celebrity in the tech world. He was the kind of man who didn't attend parties in Greenwich. He was too busy inventing the internet's successor. In the video feed, Dr. Thorne looked at the camera, or rather, looked at us through the connection Brianna had established. "Ms. Kingsley," his voice boomed through the speakers, slightly distorted by the connection but unmistakable. "Is this a bad time? The system just alerted me that the encryption key for Brianna's project was accessed from a remote IP. We need to talk about the fellowship parameters. The board is, well, frankly, the board is freaking out. They want to know if she is really 12. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when a worldview is shattered. Candace looked at the screen. She looked at Dr. Thorne. She looked at Preston, who was standing there with his mouth open, looking like a lost child. Then she looked at Brianna. The dumb one was standing tall. bathed in the light of the screen, the logo of the most prestigious technical institute on the planet framing her like a halo. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was looking directly at her aunt, and in her eyes, there was no fear. There was only the cold, hard data of the truth. "She is 12, I said into the microphone, answering the man on the screen, though my eyes never left Candace. "And she is ready to talk." I handed the microphone to Brianna. The security guards backed away. No one dared to touch us now. We were protected by something far more powerful than money or social standing. We were protected by the undeniable, overwhelming force of raw talent. Brianna took the microphone. Her hand didn't shake. She looked at the crowd. "Hello," she said. Her voice was small, but it was clear. "I have some corrections to make to the previous presentation." The screen looming over the ballroom was no longer a tool for Candace's vanity. It had become a lethal weapon of transparency, the live feed of Dr. Thorne froze as Brianna minimized the window, her fingers dancing across the glass surface of her tablet with the precision of a concert pianist. She was not just showing them a picture, she was giving them a masterclass in evidence. I stood center stage, the microphone heavy and cold in my hand. The silence in the room was different now. It was not the awkward silence of embarrassment that had followed Candace's slur against my daughter. This was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom right before the verdict was read. "You called her the dumb one," I repeated, my voice steady, ricocheting off the gilded walls. "You looked at a child who processes the world through logic rather than noise, and you decided she was empty, but while you were busy judging her silence, she was busy rewriting the future." I pointed to the screen. Brianna had opened the email attachment from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was not a standard acceptance letter. It was something far rarer, something that most of the people in this room, despite their millions, could never buy. "Read it," I commanded. "If you can tear your eyes away from your own reflections long enough, read the text." The document was a formal invitation to the Research Science Institute, the most prestigious summer research program for high school students in the world, but the paragraph highlighted in yellow, the one Brianna zoomed in on, went further. "I will read it for those of you in the back," I said, my eyes locked on the CEO of a rival tech firm who had spent the last hour ignoring us. It says the optimization algorithm submitted by Brianna Kingsley demonstrates a level of lateral thinking and structural efficiency that is estimated to be 10 years ahead of her biological age. She has successfully solved a traffic flow redundancy problem that our doctoral candidates have struggled with for the better part of a decade. In light of this, the Institute would like to formally offer to sponsor the patent filing for the architecture of the AlphaNet system, with Brianna Kingsley named as the sole inventor. The words sole inventor hung in the air. A murmur rippled through the crowd. It started among the tech investors, the men and women who understood the language of intellectual property. I saw them exchanging looks. They knew what a patent for an AI-driven urban traffic optimization system was worth. It was not just an academic achievement, it was a potential goldmine. The girl they had pitied 5 minutes ago was suddenly the most valuable person in the room. "She does not speak much," I said, looking down at my daughter, who was standing with her spine straight, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "Do you want to know why?" "Because she is busy thinking about things that you people cannot even imagine. While you are worrying about seating charts and country club memberships, she is worrying about how to make cities breathe." Candace was shaking. She looked like a statue that was beginning to crack. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her knuckles white. "This is ridiculous," she stammered, though her voice lacked its usual venom. "It is a trick. You type that up yourself. A 12-year-old cannot get a patent. It is legally impossible." "Is it?" I asked. "Doctor, Thorne seems to disagree. But since we are looking at data, let us look at all of it." I signaled to Brianna. "Show them the second file, honey, the one from last Tuesday." Brianna swiped left. The MIT letter vanished, replaced by a stark black window filled with lines of white text. It was a server log. To the uninitiated, it looked like gibberish, but I knew exactly what it was. and I knew exactly how to translate it for the jury of peers standing before us. "We have established who the genius is," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, conversational tone. "Now, let us talk about the other label you love to use. The honest Kingsley, the golden boy, the future." I turned to look at Preston. The boy was standing next to his mother, looking terrified. He knew what was on the screen. He recognized the file names. 2 weeks ago, I narrated, walking closer to the edge of the stage, Preston needed to submit a personal essay for his application to the Exeter Prep program. The prompt was to describe a challenge he had overcome using innovation. I paused. The problem, of course, is that Preston has never overcome a challenge in his life. His challenges are solved by his mother's checkbook. So, he did what he has been taught to do. He looked for a shortcut. I pointed to the timestamp on the screen. "This is a security log from our home network. It shows an unauthorized remote login from an IP address registered to, well, look at that. It is registered to the Kingsley Estate Guest Network, specifically, a device named Preston MacBook Pro." The crowd gasped. The evidence was irrefutable. It was digital DNA. "Preston hacked into Brianna's old laptop," I continued, relentlessly. "Or rather, he guessed her password because he thought she was simple. He went looking for a file. He knew Brianna was writing something complex. He thought he could steal her work, change a few words, and pass it off as his own. He thought he could steal the thoughts of the dumb one and use them to prove he was smart." Candace stepped in front of her son, shielding him. "Stop this. You are slandering a child." "I am not slandering him. Candace, I am quoting him." I nodded to Brianna. She highlighted a specific file transfer log. "Here is where it gets funny," I said, allowing a dry, humorless laugh to escape. Preston found a file. It was titled final_draft_v4. He assumed it was an essay. He assumed it was a story. He copied it, pasted it into his application portal, and hit submit without reading it. I looked at Preston. "Did you read it, Preston? Or did the words look too complicated for you?" Preston looked down at his shoes, his face burning a bright, guilty red. "You see," I explained to the audience, "Preston is illiterate when it comes to code. He didn't steal an essay. He stole a garbage file. He stole a document where Brianna had dumped all the failed lines of code, the glitchy syntax, and the corrupted data from her early experiments. He submitted 20 pages of broken algorithms and error messages to one of the most prestigious schools in the country, claiming it was his innovative personal manifesto." Laughter broke out in the back of the room. It wasn't the polite laughter of earlier. It was a shocked, incredulous laughter. The image of the golden boy submitting pages of computer gibberish as a personal essay was too absurd, too perfectly ironic to ignore. "But wait," I said, raising my hand to cut through the noise. "There is one final piece of data, the result. Candace had announced earlier that Preston had been accepted. She had built this entire party, this entire charade, on that lie." "Candace told you he got in," I said. "She told you the legacy was secure, but Brianna found something interesting in your family email server this morning, something you haven't seen yet because you were too busy getting your hair done to check your spam folder." Brianna tapped the screen one last time. The server logs vanished. In their place appeared an email inbox. It was Candace's inbox. The unread count was high, but one email stood out at the top, dated this morning at 800 hours. "From admissions office, Phillips Exeter Academy. Subject, update on application. Preston Kingsley." "Open it," I said. The email expanded to fill the 100-inch screen. The font was standard, professional, and devastating. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Kingsley, thank you for your interest in our academy. We have reviewed Preston's application, including the supplemental essay submission. While we appreciate the enthusiasm, the admissions committee found the submitted materials to be incoherent and indicative of a lack of seriousness regarding our academic standards. The essay appeared to be a collection of unstructured data rather than a personal narrative. Consequently, We are unable to offer Preston admission for the coming academic year. We wish him the best in his future endeavors. Status declined. The word declined seemed to pulse on the screen. 10 feet tall. The silence returned, but this time it was total. It was the silence of a bomb having just detonated, where the dust is settling and everyone is checking to see if they are still alive. Candace stared at the screen. Her mouth hung open, her perfectly painted lips parting in horror. She read the words once, twice, 3 times. The lie she had been telling herself. The lie she had fed to her friends, to her family. To the investors, it was all stripped away. She was naked before them, draped in nothing but her own deceit. Preston burst into tears. It was the wailing, ugly cry of a spoiled child who has never been told no, echoing awkwardly in the large hall. "He didn't get in," Margaret whispered, her voice audible from the side of the stage. She looked at Candace with pure venom. "You told me he got in. You told me the trust fund was secure." I thought," Candace stammered, looking around wildly. "I assumed he is Kingsley. They always take Kingsleys." "Not this time," I said, stepping closer to her, lowering the microphone so only she and I could share the moment, though the room watched intently. "You bet on the wrong horse. Candace, you spent 12 years polishing a pebble and ignoring the diamond. You tried to bury my daughter because she didn't fit your mold. But the thing about diamonds is that they are made under pressure, and you just applied the final bit of pressure she needed to shine." I turned back to the crowd. I looked at the sea of faces, the people who had laughed at the dumb one joke, the people who had sidelined us, the people who worshipped success above all else. "My daughter is 12 years old," I declared, my voice ringing with pride. "She has been recruited by MIT. She holds a patent pending for technology that will change how this city operates. She did this without tutors. She did this without a trust fund. She did this while you were calling her stupid." I put my arm around Brianna. She wasn't shrinking anymore. She stood tall, holding her tablet against her chest like a shield of honor. "So," I concluded, looking at the stunned faces of the Kingsley clan, "you can keep your party, you can keep your appetizers and your champagne and your lies. We have work to do." I looked at Brianna. "Are we done here, Agent Alpha?" Brianna looked at the screen, then at the weeping Preston, and finally at the frozen, horrified Candace. She tapped the tablet one last time. The screen behind us went black, abruptly cutting the connection. The room was plunged into sudden, jarring darkness before the house lights flickered back on, harsh and unforgiving. "We are done," Brianna said, her voice clear and final. We turned and walked down the stairs of the stage. The crowd parted for us instantly. This time, there was no confusion. There was only awe and the terrified realization that they had just witnessed the shifting of the world's axis. The dumb one had left the building, and she had taken all the intelligence in the room with her. The silence that had fallen over the ballroom did not last. It shattered, not with applause, but with the chaotic, buzzing energy of a hive that had just been kicked over. The revelation on the screen had stripped away the carefully curated veneer of the evening, leaving the raw, ugly truth exposed under the harsh glare of the crystal chandeliers. Candace was the first to react. The shock that had frozen her momentarily thawed into a frantic, animalistic panic. Her face, previously flushed with the heat of embarrassment, drained of all color until she looked like a wax figure melting under a heat lamp. She stared at the blank screen where her humiliation had been broadcast, and then her eyes snapped to the microphone in Brianna's hand. To her, that microphone was no longer just an amplification device, it was a smoking gun. "Give that to me," Candace shrieked, her voice cracking. She lunged forward, abandoning all pretense of grace. Her heels clicked frantically on the hardwood as she scrambled toward us, her hand outstretched like a claw. "Turn it off. Someone turn it off. She is lying. She hacked the system." She reached for Brianna, her fingers inches from my daughter's arm. I stepped forward to intercept her, ready to physically shove her back if necessary, but I didn't have to. A hand shot out from the front row, It was a heavy, authoritative hand clad in a bespoke suit jacket. It belonged to Marcus Sterling, the CEO of a major telecommunications firm and one of the wealthiest men in Connecticut. He had been nodding politely at Candace's speeches all night. But now, his face was set in stone. He caught Candace by the wrist, not violently, but with the immovable firmness of a man who was used to stopping bad ideas in their tracks. "Compose yourself, Candace," Marcus said, his voice low but carrying a weight that cut through her hysteria. "We are not done listening." "But she is lying," Candace pleaded, looking around the room for support that was rapidly evaporating. "Marcus, please. She is 12. She is unwell. It is a prank." Marcus released her wrist with a look of distaste, as if he had touched something sticky. He turned his back on her, a gesture of dismissal so profound it felt like a slap. He walked straight past the trembling Preston and approached the edge of the stage where Brianna and I stood. The room held its breath. Marcus Sterling was a titan. If he validated this, it was real. If he dismissed it, we were finished. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly at Brianna. He studied her for a long moment, taking in the frayed hem of her dress, the noise-canceling headphones resting around her neck, and the white-knuckled grip she had on her tablet. Then, he did something extraordinary. He knelt. The 6-foot-tall billionaire lowered himself onto one knee, bringing his eye level perfectly in line with my daughter's. He ignored the dirt on the floor that might stain his trousers. He ignored the absurdity of the visual. He treated her not as a child, but as a peer. "The letter mentioned a redundancy problem in the traffic flow logic," Marcus said. His tone was conversational, serious, and completely devoid of the condescension Brianna was used to hearing from adults. "Dr. Thorne said you solved it. How did you handle the latency between the traffic sensors and the central cloud server?" It was a test. It was a question spoken in the dialect of engineers, a language that Candace and her socialite friends did not speak. Brianna blinked. I saw the familiar delay, the 3-second buffer as her brain scrambled to grab the phonemes, rearrange them, and attach meaning to the sound waves. Her eyes darted to the left, then to the right. She took a breath. To the uninitiated. She looked like she was stalling. Candace let out a scoff, opening her mouth to jeer, but Marcus held up a finger to silence her without looking away from Brianna. He waited. He gave her the one thing no one else ever had time. "Cloud," Brianna said. Her voice was quiet, the words coming out in a staccato rhythm, clipped and precise. She struggled with the flow of the sentence, but the content was razor-sharp. "Cloud is too slow. Latency is variable. I used edge computing." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Edge computing. Processing the data at the traffic light itself. Brianna nodded, gaining a millimeter of confidence. "Yes, the nodes, they talk to each other like a flock. No central server, decentralized decision, matrix. It cuts reaction time by 0.4 seconds. A murmur went through the tech-savvy portion of the crowd. 0.4 seconds in traffic management was an eternity. It was the difference between a smooth flow and a gridlock. It was the difference between a near miss and a fatal accident. "And the conflict resolution," Marcus pressed, his eyes narrowing with genuine professional interest. "What if two nodes disagree on the green light duration?" "Highest density wins," Brianna answered, the words flowing slightly faster now as she latched on to the logic. "Weighted average, emergency vehicles, override, local protocols. It is hierarchical logic." Marcus stared at her for another second, then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He stood up, brushing off his knees, and looked at the crowd. He looked at the stunned investors, the gaping neighbors, and finally at the pale, trembling form of Candace. "That is not a script," Marcus announced, his voice booming without a microphone. "You cannot teach a child to fake that kind of architectural understanding. I have senior engineers on my payroll who do not understand edge computing that well." He turned back to Brianna and gave a small, respectful bow. "It is an honor to meet you, Brianna." The validation was like a physical blow to the Kingsley faction. The tide didn't just turn, it crashed over them. Preston, sensing his spotlight being permanently stolen, cracked. The pressure of the evening, the weight of the lie, and the sudden withdrawal of adoration were too much for his spoiled psyche. He stomped his foot, a petulant, childish gesture that looked ridiculous in his expensive suit. "She is lying," Preston screamed, tears streaming down his face, ruining the makeup his mother had applied. "She is stupid. Everyone knows she is the dumb one. That is my computer. That is my idea. She stole it from my room." He rushed toward Marcus, grabbing the man's sleeve. Tell them it is mine. I am a genius. I am going to Exeter." Marcus looked down at the boy with pity. "Son, do not do this." "Ask me," Preston yelled, desperate to reclaim his throne. "Ask me a question. I know computers. I play Minecraft all day." Marcus sighed. He looked at Candace, giving her a chance to intervene, to save her son from total annihilation, but Candace was frozen, catatonic with shock. "All right," Marcus said softly. "Preston, Brianna mentioned a Boolean variable in her code structure. Can you tell me what a Boolean is?" It was the most basic question possible. It was the ABC of programming, true or false, 1 or 0. Preston's mouth opened. He looked around the room, his eyes wide and wet. He looked at his mother. He looked at the ceiling. It is a ghost," he stammered, guessing based on the sound of the word. "Like, for Halloween." The laughter that erupted was not cruel. It was incredulous. It was the sound of illusion shattering. "No, Preston," Marcus said gently, peeling the boy's fingers off his sleeve. "It is not a ghost." Preston recoiled as if burned. He backed away, looking at the laughing faces, and then he turned and ran. He ran off the stage, pushing past his grandmother, and disappeared through the side door, his sobs echoing in the sudden quiet that followed the laughter. I looked at Margaret. My mother-in-law stood by the heavy velvet curtains, her hand clutching the fabric as if it were the only thing holding her upright. She looked old, for the first time. I saw the lines of age around her mouth, the frailty in her posture. She was looking at the empty space where Preston had been. And then her gaze drifted to Brianna, who was now showing her tablet screen to another interested guest who had approached the stage. Margaret's face was a map of regret. It wasn't the regret of a grandmother who had mistreated a child. She was too cold for that. It was the regret of a gambler who realized she had put the entire family fortune on a horse with a broken leg while the thoroughbred was standing in the stable next door. She had spent 5 years calling Brianna a waste of space, and now she realized that Brianna was the only thing that could have saved the Kingsley name from irrelevance. She met my eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stared at her with a flat, neutral expression. I let her see that her approval was no longer the currency I needed. She flinched and looked away, unable to bear the weight of her own miscalculation. The atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. The guests, the cream of society, were undergoing a rapid and clumsy metamorphosis. People who had avoided eye contact with me for years were suddenly pushing their way toward the front. Women who had laughed at Candace's dumb one comment were now whispering loudly about how they always sensed a quiet intelligence in Brianna. Alberta. It was Mrs. Eleanor, the cousin who had called Brianna, broke down just an hour ago. She was waving from the second row, a grotesque smile plastered on her face. "Alberta, darling, I was just telling everyone. Remember when she was a baby? She had such focused eyes. We must get lunch next week. I would love to hear more about this MIT business." A man in a tuxedo, whom I recognized as a banker who had once denied my loan application, leaned over the stage railing. "Ms. Kingsley, if you are looking for representation for the patent, my firm handles intellectual property. We would be happy to offer a family discount." It was sickening. It was hilarious. It was exactly what I expected. They didn't care about Brianna. They didn't care about justice. They smelled success. They smelled money. And like sharks sensing blood in the water, they were circling the new source of power. I ignored them all. I turned my attention to the one person who mattered in this wreckage. Candace was still standing center stage, but she was alone. The spotlight was still on her, but it felt like an interrogation lamp now. Her guests had turned their backs on her to crowd around Brianna. Her son had fled. Her mother-in-law was cowering in the shadows. She looked at me, her eyes hollow. "I gave him everything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tutors, coaches, everything. How did she do it? She barely speaks." I walked over to her. I stood close enough that no one else could hear us over the chatter of the crowd. "That is the problem, Candace," I said. "You thought the noise was talent. You thought that because Preston could talk a good game, he could play one, you spent $500,000 buying him a costume, but you forgot to check if there was a person inside it." Candace looked down at her hands. "I just wanted him to be special." "He is a child," I said, my voice hardening. "He didn't need to be special. He needed to be loved for who he was. Instead, you turned him into a fraud because you couldn't handle having an average son. You did this to him." I gestured to the room, to the people fawning over Brianna, to the empty space where Preston had stood. "And as for Brianna," I continued, "you thought you could bury her. You thought that if you called her dumb enough times, it would become true. But you forgot the most basic rule of nature. Candace, real talent is like water. You can build a dam, you can block it, you can try to hold it back, but eventually, the pressure builds up, and when it breaks, it washes everything else away." I can fix this," Candace stammered, a desperate gleam entering her eye. "We can spin this, a joint press release, cousins supporting cousins. We can say Preston helped her. We can keep the money in the family." I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "You still don't get it. There is no we. There is no family. Not anymore." I turned away from her, leaving her standing alone in her expensive dress, surrounded by the ruins of her perfect night. I walked back to Brianna, who was currently explaining the concept of neural network layering to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Brianna looked up as I approached. She looked tired. The adrenaline was fading, and the sensory overload of the crowd was creeping back in. "Mom," she said, cutting off the CEO mid-sentence. "Battery low, social battery, 0%. "I know, baby," I said, putting my arm around her. "We are leaving." "Leaving?" Mr. Sterling asked, looking disappointed. "But I have so many questions. We haven't even discussed the scalability of the algorithm." "Send us an email," I said, handing him one of the napkins from the buffet table where I had written my personal email address, not the one associated with the Kingsley estate. "Right now, the inventor needs a recharge, and frankly, the air in here is getting a little stale." "Mr." Sterling laughed, a booming sound of genuine respect. "Understood. I will be in touch. Miss Kingsley, first thing Monday." I guided Brianna toward the stairs. The crowd parted for us again, but this time, the energy was different. It wasn't confusing. It was reverence. They moved out of our way because they realized we were bigger than the room. As we reached the bottom step, I felt a hand grab my arm. I turned to see Margaret. Her eyes were wet. "Alberta," she said, her voice shaking, "you cannot just leave. We need to discuss the trust fund. If Brianna is the scholar, then technically the money should—" I gently peeled her fingers off my arm. "Keep the money, Margaret. Use it to pay for Preston's therapy. He is going to need it." I took Brianna's hand, and together, we walked down the aisle, past the gawking faces, past the fake smiles, and toward the exit. The heavy oak doors loomed ahead, marking the boundary between the suffocating world of the Kingsleys and the fresh, clean air of the night. We didn't look back. The heavy oak doors of the library slammed shut, sealing us in with the scent of stale cigar smoke, old leather, and panic. We had not made it to the car. Just as we reached the foyer, Archibald Kingsley, the patriarch of the family and the man who held the purse strings of the entire dynasty, had intercepted us. His command had not been a request, it was a summons, delivered with the gravelly authority of a man who had never been told no in 80 years. Now the four of us, Archibald, Candace, Brianna, and I were standing in the room where, 5 years ago, they had told me to institutionalize my daughter. The irony was suffocating. Outside, the valet was likely scrambling to return cars to confused guests. But inside this room, the air was thick with a frantic attempt at damage control. Archibald sat behind his massive mahogany desk. He did not look at Candace, who was slumped on a velvet sofa, dabbing at her ruined mascara with a cocktail napkin. He looked at Brianna. His eyes, usually cold and dismissive, were now gleaming with a predatory appreciation. It was the look a jeweler gives a rough stone when he realizes he almost threw a diamond into the trash. "Sit down, Alberta." Archibald grunted, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "And you, Brianna, come closer. Let grandfather get a look at you." Brianna did not move. She stood by my side, her hand gripping mine. She looked at the old man not with fear, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. "We are standing," I said, my voice flat. "Make this quick. Archibald, we have a patent to file." Archibald let out a dry chuckle, leaning back in his leather chair. "Sharp? You have become sharp? Alberta, I like that. I always said David married a woman with backbone, even if the rest of the family didn't see it." He opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out a checkbook. The leather cover made a soft slapping sound as it hit the wood. He uncapped a fountain pen, the gold nib glinting in the lamplight. "We have had a misunderstanding tonight," Archibald began, his tone smooth and businesslike. "A regretful calculation of assets. Candace made a judgment call regarding the family legacy. She bet on Preston. It appears she bet wrong." Candace let out a sob from the sofa. "I didn't know. He looks the part. He acts the part. How was I supposed to know he was plagiarizing?" "Silence," Archibald snapped, not even turning his head. He looked back at us. "The boy is a liability now. That email from Exeter is going to leak. The rumors are already starting. The Kingsley name is taking a hit tonight. Stock prices for the holding company might even wobble on Monday if the narrative isn't controlled." He began to write. The scratching of the pen was the only sound in the room. "But," Archibald continued, tearing the check from the book with a crisp rip, "we have a solution. We have a new narrative. The Kingsley genius wasn't the boy. It was the girl, the quiet one, the observer. It is a compelling story. The media loves a hidden prodigy." He slid the check across the polished wood of the desk. It stopped right at the edge, directly in front of me. I looked down. The number was written in perfect cursive. $500,000 and 0 cents. "The Educational Trust," Archibald declared. "In full, immediately available, no waiting for probate, no monthly installments, $500,000. Deposited into an account for Brianna tomorrow morning." I stared at the check. It was more money than I made in 5 years at the firm. It was life-changing money, or at least, it would have been yesterday. "And the condition?" I asked, because there is always a condition with this family. Archibald smiled, a thin stretching of his lips that did not reach his eyes. "A small administrative detail. The patent for this AlphaNet thing, it needs to be filed under the Kingsley Family Trust. The press release will state that Brianna developed the technology in the Kingsley Innovation Lab, which we will build in the East Wing starting next week, and that she was supported every step of the way by her loving family." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We will say we kept her out of the spotlight to protect her gift. We will say Preston's application was a decoy to draw attention away from the real project. We can spin this, Alberta. We can make Candace look like a protective aunt, not a monster. We can save the brand." I felt a wave of nausea. They wanted to buy her. They wanted to take her brilliance, the very thing they had mocked and spat upon for a decade, and wrap it in their flag. They wanted to rewrite history so that they were the heroes. the patrons of the arts, rather than the bullies who had tried to crush her spirit. Before I could speak, Candace launched herself from the sofa. She rushed over and fell to her knees in front of Brianna. It was a performance worthy of Broadway, desperate and pathetic. "Brianna, honey," Candace pleaded, reaching for my daughter's hands. Brianna stepped back, keeping her hands firmly on her tablet. Candace grabbed the hem of Brianna's dress instead. "I am so sorry. You know that, right? Auntie Candace was just so stressed. The IPO, the pressure of the party. I didn't mean those things. I was trying to motivate you. That is all it was. Tough love." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining the layers of foundation. "Alberta, please, you are a mother. You know what it is like to want the best for your child. Preston is ruined. If this gets out, the cheating, the rejection, he will be a pariah. No school will take him, but if we present a united front, if we say it was all part of a plan, we can save him. Please, for the family." "The family," I repeated, tasting the word like sour milk. "You want me to save the family that told me to put my daughter in an asylum? We were wrong," Candace wailed. "We see that now. She is a jewel. She is the crown jewel of the Kingsleys. Think of what we can do for her. The best schools, private labs, connections. She will be the queen of New York society before she is 18. They were painting a picture of a golden cage. They saw Brianna as a trophy to be displayed on their mantelpiece, a shiny object to distract the world from their own rot. They didn't care about her code. They didn't care about the hours she spent in the garage. They only cared about the reflection of themselves they could see in her success. I looked at the check again. $500,000. "It is a lot of money, Alberta," Archibald reminded me softly. "Think about her future. You drive a sedan with a dent in the bumper. You live in a 2-bedroom apartment. Do not let your pride rob your daughter of her inheritance." I looked at Brianna. She was watching the adults with that same intense, decoding gaze she used on her algorithms. She was processing the inputs, the money, the tears, the offers, the desperation. I decided to let her answer. This was her victory, not mine. "Bree," I said softly, "what do you think grandfather wants to give you the trust fund? But we have to tell everyone that they helped you. We have to say they are the reason you succeeded." Brianna looked at the check on the desk. She looked at the number. Then she looked at Archibald. "You are offering a transaction," Brianna said. Her voice was steady, lacking the emotional inflection that Archibald and Candace were using, which made her sound even more authoritative. "You wish to purchase the intellectual property rights and the branding rights of my work for $500,000. Archibald blinked. "Well, when you put it that way, yes, it is a gift, Brianna." "It is not a gift," Brianna corrected him. "It is a bad investment strategy." She tapped her tablet screen and turned it around so Archibald could see. "I have already reviewed the fellowship grant from MIT," Brianna stated, pointing to the figures on the screen. "The Research Science Institute includes a full academic scholarship to any university of my choice upon graduation, valued at approximately $320,000 over 4 years. Additionally, the patent sponsorship includes an initial seed funding round from the Institute's venture arm." She swiped to the next page. "Doctor, Thorne attached a valuation estimate for the AlphaNet traffic optimization protocol based on current municipal contracts in smart cities like Boston and Singapore. The projected licensing fees for the first year alone are estimated at $1.2 million. The room went dead silent. Candace stopped crying. Archibald's mouth fell open slightly, his cigar dropping from his fingers onto the expensive Persian rug. Brianna looked at the check on the desk, the $500,000 that was supposed to be the ultimate leverage, and then looked back at her grandfather. "Your offer is significantly below market value," Brianna said, her tone purely factual. "Furthermore, attaching the Kingsley brand to the project would lower its credibility. Your current brand equity is negative due to the fraud committed by Preston. Associating my work with his failure would be illogical." She reached out, picked up the check, and held it for a second. Archibald watched her, his eyes wide. He thought she was going to take it. Brianna placed the check back on the desk, but she slid it toward Candace. "You should keep this," Brianna said to her aunt. "You will need it to pay for the lawyers when the school sues you for falsifying an application." "Brianna," Candace gasped. "I do not need your money," Brianna continued, stepping back and taking my hand. "I am fully funded, and I own 100% of my creation." The realization hit the adults like a physical blow. They had nothing. They had spent their lives believing that money was the ultimate power, the leash they could use to control everyone around them. They had believed that I, the struggling widow, and Brianna, the broken child, would always be begging for scraps from their table. But in 1 minute, a 12-year-old girl had flipped the board. She didn't just have money, she had her own money. She had clean money. Money that didn't come with strings or insults or emotional blackmail. Archibald slumped back in his chair. He looked suddenly ancient, a king whose castle had crumbled into dust. He looked at the check, his great weapon lying useless on the desk. "You are making a mistake," he rasped, but there was no power in his voice. "Family is everything." "No," I said, speaking for the first time since the offer was made. "Families are the people who sit in a freezing garage holding a flashlight while you solder a circuit board. Family are the people who listen when you do not speak. You people. You are just biology, and bad biology at that." I looked at Candace, who was staring at the floor, defeated. "Come on, Brianna," I said. "Let us go home. We have a video conference on Monday, and I want to stop for ice cream." "Ice cream is acceptable," Brianna said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I would like mint chocolate chips." "Mint chocolate chip it is." We turned our backs on the money. We turned our backs on the mahogany desk, the velvet sofa, and the people who sat on them. We walked to the library doors. "Alberta, wait," Candace called out, her voice thin and desperate. "What do I tell the press? They are waiting outside the gates." I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around. "Tell them the truth, Candace," I said. "Tell them you underestimated the dumb one, or tell them nothing. It doesn't matter, because from now on, Brianna writes the story." I opened the doors. The cool air of the hallway rushed in, clearing away the smell of the cigar smoke. We stepped out, and the heavy doors clicked shut behind us. Sealing the Kingsleys inside their tomb of gold and regret, we were free, and for the first time in 5 years. My bank account balance didn't matter, because I knew exactly what I was worth. The hallway leading to the front door of the Kingsley estate felt different than it had when we arrived 2 hours ago, when we walked in. The marble floors had felt slippery, like ice designed to make us fall, and the portraits of dead ancestors lining the walls had seemed to stare down with judgmental sneers. Now, the floor was just stone, cold and hard beneath my heels, and the portraits were just oil and canvas, fading relics of people who had never done anything half as important as what my daughter had achieved in a garage. I walked with a stride that I had not possessed since before David died. It was the stride of a woman who no longer needed permission to exist. Brianna matched my pace, her hand in mine, her head high. She was not shrinking anymore. The headphones were still around her neck, but she wasn't using them to block out the world. She was listening to the sound of our liberation. "Alberta, stop." Candace's voice echoed down the corridor, shrill and desperate. It bounced off the vaulted ceilings, stripping away the elegance of the architecture and leaving only the ugly sound of panic. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. "I said stop," Candace shouted, running ahead of us to block the double doors that led to the driveway. She was panting, her chest heaving beneath the silver silk of her gown. Her face was a ruin of smeared makeup and blotchy red skin. She looked like a queen whose kingdom had just been burned to the ground, standing in the ashes and demanding obedience from the smoke. "Move, Candace," I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. It was the voice of an engineer looking at a structural flaw that was no longer her problem to fix. "You cannot just leave like this," Candace hissed, spreading her arms across the doorframe. We have a deal to make. You think you can just walk out with the patent. You think you can embarrass us and then just disappear. We are not disappearing, I corrected her. We are ascending. There is a difference. You are Kingsley, she spat, trying to regain some semblance of authority. Brianna is Kingsley. You owe this family. You owe us for the years we supported you, for the dinners, for the inclusion. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Inclusion. You invited us here to be props, Candace. You invited us so you could feel benevolent while you kicked us under the table. You didn't support us. You tolerated us. I took a step closer to her. The distance between us was now less than a foot. I could smell the stale champagne on her breath. And as for the name, I said, my voice dropping to a level that was deadly serious. You are right about one thing. That name carries weight. It carries a history. And as of tonight, I am deciding that it is a weight my daughter no longer needs to carry. Candace blinked, confused. What are you talking about? I am changing her name, I declared. On Monday morning, I am filing a petition with the court. She will no longer be Brianna Kingsley. She will take my maiden name. She will be Brianna Vance. The color drained from Candace's face completely. You can't. David would never. David is dead, I said. The grief finally calloused over into strength. And if he were here, he would be the first one to hand me the pen. He loved Brianna for who she was. Not for the crest on your stationery. I am not going to let her future be tied to a name that stands for fraud and cruelty. When the world hears about AlphaNet, they are going to hear the name Vance. The Kingsley name will be exactly where it belongs in the footnotes of a scandal about a rejected prep school application. This was the blow that hurt her more than the money. The money she could perhaps recover from, but the erasure of the credit. The knowledge that the greatest achievement to come out of this bloodline would bear a different label. That was a narcissistic injury she would never heal from. Candace's eyes narrowed. The desperation turned into malice. If she couldn't buy me, and she couldn't guilt me, she would try to break me. It was the only tool she had left. You are making a mistake, Alberta, she said, her voice turning low and venomous. You think you are so independent. You think you are safe. You work for Apex Meridian. My husband plays golf with your CEO every Sunday. We have friends in this town, powerful friends. She stepped forward, trying to loom over me. If you walk out that door with that patent, she threatened, I will make sure you are fired by Monday afternoon. I will make sure you are blacklisted from every engineering firm in Connecticut. You will be destitute. You will be begging me to take that check back. It was a classic Kingsley move. Threaten the livelihood of the working class. Remind the poor that their survival depends on the whims of the rich. 5 hours ago, that threat would have terrified me. It would have made me freeze. It would have made me apologize. But 5 hours ago, I didn't know that my daughter was a Titan. And 5 hours ago, I hadn't had a very interesting conversation with Marcus Sterling. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a chess player who sees mate in one. Go ahead, I said softly. Call him. Call my boss at Apex. Tell him whatever you want. Candace looked taken aback by my lack of fear. I will. Don't think I won't. I know you will, I said. But it won't matter, because I resigned. You... what? I resigned, I repeated, savoring the words. About 20 minutes ago, while Brianna was showing Mr. Sterling the scalability models for the traffic grid, Mr. Sterling asked me a question. He asked me why a woman who raised a genius and understands urban planning better than his own directors is working mid-level management for a second-tier firm. I watched Candace's jaw tighten. She knew where this was going, and she hated it. He offered me a job. Candace, I said, Senior Strategic Advisor for the AlphaNet Implementation Project, directly under the Sterling Holdings umbrella. I leaned in, whispering the final nail into the coffin of her threat. The starting salary is $350,000 a year. That is 3 times what I make now, plus stock options. And the best part? My only job is to make sure that Brianna has everything she needs to build her world. So go ahead, Call my old boss. Tell him I said goodbye." Candace slumped against the door frame. She looked small. The threat of poverty, the lever she had used to control me for years, had snapped in her hands. She had no power left. She was just a woman in an expensive dress standing in the wreckage of her own arrogance. You planned this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You planned to humiliate us." "I didn't plan anything," I said. "I just stopped letting you plan for me." I reached into my purse. My hand brushed against the cool leather of my wallet and found the plain white envelope I had prepared earlier that week. I had originally intended to mail it anonymously, thinking I would never have the courage to hand it to her face, but tonight was a night for courage. I pulled out the envelope. It was thin. There was no money inside. There were no legal threats. I held it out to her. "What is this?" Candace asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "A lawsuit." "No," I said. "It is a gift, a real one." She hesitated, then reached out and took it with shaking fingers. She opened the flap and pulled out the single sheet of folded paper. She read the header, Connecticut Center for Adolescent Behavioral Health, the Quiet Mind Institute, Family Integrity Counseling Services. It was a list of therapists, specifically, therapists who specialized in narcissistic parenting and the pressure of high expectations on children. "What is the meaning of this?" Candace demanded, her face flushing red again. "It is for Preston," I said, my voice softening not out of pity for her, but out of genuine concern for the boy who had fled the room in tears. "He is not a villain, Candace. He is a 12-year-old boy who has been taught that his worth is tied to a transcript he didn't earn. He is scared, and he is going to be a lot more scared when he realizes that the world doesn't grade on a curve for Kingsleys." Candace crumpled the paper in her hand, her knuckles turning white. "He doesn't need a therapist," she snapped. "He needs an Ivy League degree." "No," I said firmly. "He needs a mother who loves him enough to let him be average. He needs to learn how to fail. He needs to learn that lying to get ahead leaves you lonely and terrified." I looked her dead in the eye. "Do not make him a second version of you. Candace, one is enough." Candace gasped, her mouth opening to retort, but no sound came out. The truth hit her with the force of a physical slap. She looked at the crumpled paper in her hand, then at the empty hallway behind her where her son had disappeared. For a split second, I saw the cracks in her armor. I saw the terror of a woman who realizes she has built her house on sand. But I didn't stay to watch it collapse. I had done my part. "Come on, Brianna," I said. I reached past Candace and pushed open the heavy double doors. The night air rushed in to meet us. It was crisp and cold, smelling of rain and wet earth. It smelled like reality. We stepped out onto the portico. The valet was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, standing next to my gray sedan. The car looked small and humble amidst the Bentleys and Porsches that still lined the driveway. But to me, it looked like a chariot. It was the vehicle that would take us away from this toxic place. "Mom," Brianna said as we walked down the stone steps. "Yeah. My heart rate is normalizing," she stated. "Calculated stress levels are dropping by 40%. I squeezed her hand. "Mine too, kiddo. Mine too." We reached the car. The valet opened the door for me, looking at us with a newfound respect. He had likely heard the rumors flying around the staff quarters already. The servants always knew the truth before the masters did. I tipped him $20, the last $20 in my wallet, until my new paycheck arrived and got into the driver's seat. Brianna buckled herself beside me. She placed her tablet on her lap, but she didn't turn it on. Instead, she looked out the window at the massive, illuminated mansion looming over us. From the outside, the Kingsley estate looked perfect. The lights were golden and warm. The architecture was imposing. It looked like the American dream solidified into brick and mortar. But we knew what was inside. We knew about the cold drafts, the hollow echoes, and the people who were so poor all they had was money. I started the engine. It sputtered once, then roared to life, a reliable, steady sound. I put the car in gear and drove down the long, winding driveway. I watched the house recede in the rearview mirror. I saw the figure of Candace standing in the doorway, a small, silver silhouette against the light, watching us go. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel resentment. I just felt a profound, airy lightness. We were leaving the glitter behind, but we were taking the gold with us. "Where to?" Brianna asked as we reached the iron gates. "The highway," I said, turning onto the main road, leaving Greenwich behind. And then, the future. The road ahead was dark, illuminated only by my headlights, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I knew exactly where we were going, and I knew that with Brianna sitting next to me, we would build a light bright enough to see the way. The sedan merged onto the empty road, speeding up, putting miles between us and the past, driving straight into the open arms of a life that finally belonged to us. 3 months had passed since the night the foundation of the Kingsley Empire had cracked, and the world had shifted on its axis. The season had turned from the damp chill of late winter to the tentative warmth of early spring, bringing with it a sense of renewal that felt less like a change in weather and more like a change in destiny. I stood in the wings of the main stage at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center, peering through the heavy velvet curtains. The auditorium was vast, a cavern of glass and steel filled with 3,000 of the most brilliant minds in technology, education, and policy. The air hummed with a different frequency here. It did not smell of stale perfume and desperation like the Kingsley Ballroom. It smelled of ozone, coffee, and the electric charge of ideas that were about to change the world. Tonight was the Global Future Shapers Gala, a nationally televised event honoring young innovators who were redefining the boundaries of science. And standing just 5 feet away from me, waiting for her cue, was the guest of honor. Brianna looked different. She was not wearing the scratchy, frilly dress Candace had forced her into for the party. She was wearing a sleek, charcoal gray suit that she had picked out herself, paired with a soft linen shirt that did not irritate her sensory processing issues. The noise-canceling headphones were gone, replaced by discreet, custom-molded earpieces that filtered the ambient noise of the crowd into a manageable stream of audio data. She stood still, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, breathing in a slow, measured rhythm. "Are you nervous?" I whispered, leaning down to check on her one last time. Brianna looked up at me. Her eyes were clear, reflecting the blue stage lights. "No," she replied, her voice steady. "The data is sound. The audience is irrelevant to the truth of the algorithm. I am just buffering." I smiled, smoothing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "Buffer away, baby. You have earned every second." While we waited in the warmth of the backstage area, a very different scene was playing out outside the venue, under the harsh glare of the streetlights and the flashing bulbs of the paparazzi. I had not invited the Kingsleys. In fact, I had done something far more satisfying. I had given the security team a specific set of instructions. On the large monitors in the green room, I could see the live feed from the external security cameras. It was a train wreck, and I watched it with the detached fascination of a historian witnessing the fall of Rome. A black limousine had pulled up to the VIP entrance. Candace stepped out, followed by Preston and a reluctant-looking Archibald. Candace was dressed for a coronation, wearing a gown that was too loud and too bright for a tech conference. She was smiling that plastered, desperate smile, waving at cameras that were not pointing at her. She marched up to the security checkpoint, holding her head high, pretending that the scandal of the last 3 months had not turned her name into social poison. "Candace Kingsley," she announced to the head of security, a large man with a stone face who held a digital tablet. "And family, we are here to support my niece, Brianna Vance. We are on the family list." The guard looked down at his tablet. He scrolled for a moment, his expression unchanging. "I am sorry, ma'am. I do not see Kingsley on the guest list." "Check again," Candace snapped, her smile faltering. "It is Vance now. She changed her name, but we are her closest relatives, her aunt and cousin. We are the ones who discovered her talent. The guard tapped the screen. Ah, I see. He looked up, his eyes cold. I have a specific flag here on the name Kingsley. You are not on the guest list. Ma'am, you are on the exclusion list. Access denied. Permanently. The color drained from Candace's face. Exclusion. That is absurd. We are family. I demand to see the event organizer. Please step aside, ma'am, the guard said, his voice rising just enough to attract the attention of the nearby press pool. You are blocking the entrance for invited guests. The reporters, sensing blood in the water, turned their cameras toward the commotion. A journalist from a major tech blog recognized them. He thrust a microphone toward Preston, who was trying to hide behind his mother. Mrs. Kingsley, the reporter shouted, is it true that your son's application to Exeter was rejected due to plagiarism? Did he really try to submit Brianna's code as his own essay? Preston flinched as if struck. He looked older than he had 3 months ago, but not wiser. He looked haunted, his arrogance stripped away to reveal the frightened child underneath. No comment, Candace shrieked, shielding her face with her clutch. That is a lie. It is a smear campaign. And what about the investigation into the Kingsley Charity Fund? Another reporter yelled. Is it true investors are pulling out because of the fraud allegations? Archibald, who had remained silent until now, saw the writing on the wall. He turned around, got back into the limousine, and slammed the door, leaving Candace and Preston stranded on the sidewalk. The image of Candace standing there, locked out of her niece's triumph, rejected by the very society she had tried to impress, was the final seal on her fate. She wasn't a villain anymore. She was a punchline. Back inside, the lights in the auditorium dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Doctor. Aris Thorne walked onto the stage. He looked exactly as he had on the video call, rumpled and brilliant. He adjusted the microphone and smiled at the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Doctor, Thorne began, his voice echoing through the hall. We talk a lot about the future. We talk about flying cars and quantum computing. But the future isn't a machine. The future is a mind. And sometimes, the most powerful minds are the ones we forget to listen to. He gestured to the wings. Tonight, it is my distinct honor to present the Young Innovator of the Year award to a brilliant young mathematician whose work on decentralized urban flow has already been adopted by 3 major cities. Please welcome the architect of the AlphaNet, Brianna Vance. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't polite. It was genuine. I gave Brianna a gentle nudge. Go get them. She walked out onto the stage. She looked small against the massive backdrop, but she walked with a purpose that made her seem 10 feet tall. She stopped at the podium. The microphone was too high for her, but she didn't adjust it. She didn't need it. She placed her tablet on the stand and connected it to the AV system. The room went silent, waiting for her to speak. Brianna looked out at the sea of faces. She didn't open her mouth. Instead, she raised her hands. She began to sign. Her movements were fluid, graceful, and precise. American Sign Language. It was a language she had been learning in secret, finding it more logical and less overwhelming than spoken English. As her hands moved, a voice filled the auditorium. It wasn't a robotic, generic AI voice. It was a synthesized version of her own voice, soft, clear, and perfectly steady, generated by the text-to-speech software she had written herself. Hello, the voice said, perfectly synchronized with her signs. For a long time, people thought I was silent because I was empty. They thought that because I could not process their noise, I had no signal of my own. She paused. The audience was captivated. My family called me broken, the voice continued. They wanted to fix me. They wanted to make me loud like them. But in the silence, I found patterns. I found logic. I found a way to make the world make sense when people did not. Brianna looked up, her eyes shining. I built AlphaNet not to control traffic, but to help things flow, to stop the collisions, to make sure that every signal gets to where it needs to go without crashing. She took a deep breath, her hands forming the final, powerful shapes of her message. I learned that intelligence is not about how loud you speak, the voice echoed, ringing with a profound truth that brought tears to my eyes. It is about how closely you listen to the world. Thank you. For a second, there was silence. Then, the room exploded. 3,000 people stood up as one. The ovation was a physical force, a wall of sound that washed over the stage. But this time, the noise didn't scare Brianna. She stood there, bathing in it, a small smile playing on her lips. She accepted the crystal trophy from Dr. Thorne, holding it up not like a weapon, but like a lantern. I stood in the wings, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't just crying for her success. I was crying for the years of fear, the years of hiding, the years of believing that we were less than. All of it was washed away by the sound of that applause. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, wiping my eyes. It was a text message. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten for a fraction of a second, a phantom reflex from a past life. Candace. I opened the message. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an insult. Alberta, please. The stock dropped another 12% today after the news broke about the gate incident. Archibald is talking about liquidating my assets to cover the lawsuits. I have nowhere to go. Preston is refusing to leave his room. Please, we are family. Can you loan me something, just until this blows over? I stared at the words. 3 months ago, she had offered me $5,000 to send my daughter to trade school. Now, she was begging the mother of the dumb one for a lifeline. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no vindication, just the quiet realization that she was a stranger to me. She was a ghost from a bad dream that I had finally woken up from. I didn't type a reply. I didn't owe her an explanation. I tapped the small eye icon in the corner of the screen. I scrolled down to the bottom of the contact card. I pressed the button written in red text. Block caller. The message vanished. The connection was severed. I slid the phone back into my pocket and walked out onto the stage to hug my daughter. The crashing of the waves was the only sound now. The Atlantic Ocean stretched out before us, vast and gray and endless. We were sitting on the deck of a small, weathered beach house in Cape Cod. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have marble floors or smart home security systems. It had creaky floorboards, a drafty kitchen, and a view of the sunrise that cost $1 million, but was free to anyone who woke up early enough to see it. We had moved here 2 weeks after the gala. I had taken the job with Sterling Holdings, but I worked remotely. Brianna had enrolled in an online program for gifted youth that allowed her to study at her own pace, surrounded by the sea air and the silence she loved. Brianna sat on the swinging bench beside me, her legs tucked under her. She was sketching on her new tablet a top-of-the-line model gifted by Marcus Sterling. She wasn't writing code today. She was drawing the ocean. "It is funny," she said, her voice soft. She didn't use the synthesizer with me. She spoke with her own voice, halting but comfortable. "The waves, they are recursive. They repeat, but never the same way twice." "That is nature, baby," I said, sipping my coffee. "Chaos and order, dancing together." She stopped drawing and looked at me. The sea breeze caught her hair, blowing it across her face. She looked so young, yet so old. "Mom." "Yeah." "Candace said, we were Kingsleys," she murmured, tracing a line on the screen. "She said, that defined us. Now, we are Vances. But does the name change the data?" She looked up, her eyes searching mine for the answer. "Who are we now?" I looked out at the horizon, where the gray water met the gray sky. I thought about the long road that had brought us here, the insults, poverty, the fear, and then the courage, the brilliance, the breaking free. I turned to my daughter and smiled. "We are not a name, Brianna," I said gently. "We are not a bank account, and we are definitely not what other people say we are." I reached over and tapped her chest, right over her heart. "We are ourselves," I whispered. "We are the signal in the noise, and that is enough." Brianna smiled. She looked back at her drawing. adding a splash of blue to the gray waves. "Yes," she said simply. "Variable defined. Value. Infinite." Inside the house, on the wall above the fireplace, hung a simple black frame. Inside it was not a family crest. It was not a portrait of an ancestor. It was a single sheet of paper with a red MIT logo. It hung there not as a trophy to make the neighbors jealous, but as a reminder that the world had tried to tell a girl she was nothing, and she had answered by proving she was everything. It was a testament to the quiet power of belief, a beacon that would guide us through whatever storms lay ahead. We sat there as the sun climbed higher, warming the wood beneath our feet. Two survivors enjoying the peace of a victory that no one could ever take away. Thank you for listening to this story of justice and redemption. If you enjoyed seeing the underdog win and the arrogant fall, please tell me in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Brianna's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Scarlet Revenge Stories, like the video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people who need a reminder that silence is powerful.